to enter our room. We had 24 people signed up to be here with us today. And the person who gets the prize for showing up first is my father.
Yay, Papa.
Hey, Pops. Hi, Dan. Hi, Brenda. Hi, Kathy. As you are all entering the room, hi, Anne-Marie. Thanks for coming back. Some of you, you can put your, where you're calling in from in the chat. So if you're from, you can either put your state or your city, but we would love to see where you are calling in from in the chat. So I'm seeing Cliff and Laura, Donna, Janet, Kara, I hope I said that right. Please go ahead and put your information in the chat. We'd like to know where you are all coming from. And what we'd love is if you can post it to all panelists and attendees. So everybody knows where we're congregating from. We're around the world, around the country. So Pleasant Hill, California, thank you. And I will limit myself from saying the names of attendees unless you give me a thumbs up or permission to use your name. Otherwise, the panelists and I have our names very clearly presented to you. Some are able to use camera, some are not, but we're working on it. Clayton, California, Provincetown, Massachusetts, woohoo, look at us. So before I introduce our panelists, I do want to thank my dear friend Jodi for maintaining the Facebook Live comments. I wasn't able to do that yesterday and people had comments and thoughts. So if you are watching our webinar on Facebook, you also can say hello, tell us where you are watching from, what city, state, country, and Jodi will update me so I can update the viewers. And then when we ask questions, we would love for you to also post that, and we will do what we can to make sure you are not ignored, our dear Facebook. And yeah, unfortunately, the podcast folks, you get to listen, but I have to ignore you because I cannot do so much multitasking. I will just say that right off the bat. I'm not, yeah. So, okay, we have Berkeley, California, Terrebonne, Oregon, Joshua Tree, California, Richmond, California. Wow, this is awesome. Do we have any Facebook comments yet, Jodi?
No, we do not.
Right. They are silent viewers. Break your silence. Okay, sorry. We have Mimsa, how do you say that? Membras? Oh, Becky. Sorry, whoops, from New Mexico. All right, awesome. We're going to have people climbing the list here. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes because we did have 24 registrants. Castaic, California. Oh, welcome back. Great, glad you're here. People are putting in the chat where they are from. And yeah, Jodi has that. Oops, we lost Deborah. She's going to try again. As people post, you're welcome to interrupt me, Jodi, to know that you say, hey, we got one. So yeah, just wait another minute or so. We've got 12 people attending so far, and we had 24 RSVP. So we're just going to wait a couple.
Oh, she froze?
I don't know.
Unfrozen?
Misha.
Letting her know she froze.
I think there was a predicted cold front in California, though, was there not?
And she went out to come back in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that cold front. So there you go, frozen.
Oh, is that what could have caused it?
That's what yeah, one jumps to conclusions, right?
Ladies, where are you from?
Toni,
Who
where
is
you
that?
from? Kathleen, where
The,
are you from?
the unknown speaker. Well, so
Oh,
where are you from?
Deborah, we still can't see your beautiful face.
Well, you're gonna see it. They say I can't start my video till the host come back, so I'm hoping when she come back,
Oh,
I can start
okay.
it again. Yeah.
okay.
So
Yeah.
I've only Zoomed about 1,000 times in the last month, so you know.
Jodi, I'm co-host. Could I start her video? Probably not.
I don't know.
That's a good question.
It's not
Misha's
the
trying to
first
get,
time. I'm probably the machine is probably just tired.
yeah, Misha's trying to come back in. Let's see if we,
Oh, Deborah, you asking where we were from or where we
Yeah.
live?
Yeah.
I live in Atlanta.
Well, you're right here with me. I'm in Marietta.
Oh my God, I'm in Lilburn.
Oh, you're in the How wonderful. Yeah, I'm in Marietta, going up 75 to Chattanooga. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very close.
Yes,
You
that
said you were in
is.
Milton or Milburn? Milton?
No, I'm in Gwinnett County.
Gwinnett County. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know it
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
Lilburn, yeah.
Toni,
I'm
can
actually
you,
close to Stone Mountain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I
Right.
live like 3 miles from Stone Mountain.
Okay, good. It's when they cross over the border there.
Yeah.
so Misha's having a little bit of trouble coming in, but Toni, if you can maybe try, someone suggested as a co-host, you might be able to
Yes.
let Deborah's video on, if you
I
could try that,
clicked on
please.
Deborah's name, and the only thing that I see related to video is asks to start video. So I
Okay.
clicked on that button, but the red
Not
line
letting-
is still across
Okay.
the camera.
Yeah,
All right,
so,
so-
cannot start
okay.
until the host is, okay. Host is
So
not something.
Changed.
If we, Misha asked you all to introduce yourselves as she's trying to come back in. Deborah,
Sure.
we'll get you up and running hopefully soon with the video. Just be patient, please. Yeah, maybe Kathleen or Toni or Deborah, anyone want to start? Kind of introduce yourself?
Sure. Absolutely. Deborah, you'd like to go first?
Well, Deborah Gilmore, I'm from Marietta, Georgia. I have been a registered nurse, and also I've been in real estate for 30 years. So that is I. Originally from Chicago, though. Misha, it says if you start the video, I can.
Misha's back.
Okay, she's back. I said cannot start your video, so the host has stopped my video. Did you stop my video?
I'm gonna make you co-host, and then you should be able to start your video.
Okay,
Thank
let's
you
see what happens there.
for. Yeah, don't know what happened, but I lost internet completely. So,
Technology, it happens.
thanks for being patient, and I have to. I am back on the podcast channel as well. I think we're good, and I'm curious. Yes, Janet, thank you. Says I'm frozen. So
There she is.
frozen in time.
I'm here.
There's Deborah.
Yeah, you're back.
I'm
Oh
here.
my goodness. Oh, this is.
Did you hear me? I've only done it 1,000 times. I guess it's just burned out, you know?
That's all good. It's all good. Thank you to everyone for your questions. I don't know if we got any more. Well, what did I miss?
Just Deborah's
Well, I started
wonderful
out the name.
introduction.
I don't know.
Right.
I know Kathleen is from this area, so I don't know about
We're,
Jodi and
Deborah and
Toni yet.
myself live in the same area.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Wait, Deborah, I thought for some reason you were in the Walnut Creek area.
No, I'm outside Atlanta on the other side of Kathleen.
So
I'm in
did you
Indiana.
and mom, so you and mom are both realtors, and you met
Yes.
where did you guys meet?
We met as members of Women's Council Realtors. I was national president in 2010.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know Barbara before then because I think I had come back and forth to California a couple of times. So yeah.
Yeah.
The sweetheart.
I know, I miss her. She'd be
And
so
she sent me
angry
all
right
your-
now.
Your music. Are you singing anymore and playing anymore?
I am. In fact, I did a live post just before the webinar.
Very good.
So, yeah.
Very good. So she sent me your music. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, my sister and I both, we're both singers and songwriters. So
Good,
glad to hear,
good.
Deborah. Thank you. Kathleen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Kathleen Carnegie-Grant, and I was born and raised in London, England,
Oh my God.
of Jamaican parents. So I came to the States as a young adult. I was a cardiovascular ultrasound tech for 20 years. So I've been in the medical field about 25 years. And now I'm a budding entrepreneur, doing health coaching for women.
Very good.
Yes.
She's got some pretty good juice remedies.
Ooh, I bet.
Thank you. And I guess, I guess I would like to ask, just for the sake of the attendees too, but Deborah, do you identify as a Black woman, African-American woman? How do you identify?
You know what? I identify as a Black woman with African-American, African ethnicity. You know,
Okay.
I have, family. So I stay with that because of my family and the heritage I know of my family. So I figure when you say, to me, when you say African American, I somehow in my brain, my old brain, I think it's somebody who has immigrated to America and they originated now from Africa. So, but I came from the South Side of Chicago.
Okay.
And so, like I said, I'm a Black woman from the South Side of Chicago.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. And Kathleen?
Yeah, I am a Black woman. Anywhere I go, I'm a Black woman. My heritage is Jamaican. So that's, plain and simple. I'm a Black woman with a Jamaican heritage because that culture is a little different from, the African American culture. And this is the first time that when I came to America, that all this, you Black, or you this, I'm like, okay, I'm just Black. I'm a global citizen.
Yes, yeah.
I like to think
and
myself.
it's interesting because, some people have been referred to as Black and they get very offended. And some people get referred to as African American, like, excuse me, no. So I think the reason for me anyways, why I asked the question is because I would like to use the identity you prefer. I'd like to respect what your choice is. Now, it gets very confusing if I were to ask everybody I know, could you tell me? Because I won't remember and I'll have to ask again and again, which is okay, because I still want to respect your identity.
Misha, doesn't matter. I've been through everything. You can call me anything from 1940 on up. I'm born in 49, so I'm 71.
As long as it's nice though, right?
I've heard it all.
Okay, but I like to use nice terms.
That's all right. Okay. I remember when my dad, I was nursing doing private duty, and I went to a gentleman's house. He was there for his wife, and right here in Smyrna, Georgia. And I never forget walking in. The guy at the time, I was probably in my late 30s, and he was probably in his 80s. And I walked in the door, and he says, "Well, I didn't know they're going to send me a colored nurse." Now, I could have got offended. But I didn't, because in his time, in this area, that's how they refer to Black or African Americans, colored. And so my dad at the time, he was about 70. He said, "Yeah, I remember when we were colored too." So it's turned purple, it just turns different names. And so.
Thank you for that, Deborah. Thank you.
No problem.
Toni, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Toni and I live in North Carolina, just about 50 minutes outside Raleigh. So we're all in the South. That's interesting for the most part. I'm a physical therapist. I work in medicine. I've worked in real estate. I've worked in a lot of different other areas as a hobby, but my primary career is in medicine, which I really enjoy. Working on a nonprofit now for a housing initiative for low-income women, which is what brought me to North Carolina. So I'm very excited to be here and also to spend a little bit of life back on the West Coast where all the rest of these lovely people are from. So thank you for having this. Misha, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for helping me and being here again. Toni came in at the tail end of Wednesday's webinar, and it was actually amazing. She was able to offer an opportunity for people after the webinar to do a visualization, which maybe I'll have you connect later to,
Sure.
Okay, good. So, and then somebody had asked, I think, if they freeze and have to leave message, if they will be able to come back in. Yeah, if any of the attendees or even the hosts or panelists get knocked out of the room, such as I gave you quite an example. You might be in the ether for a while. You might be not really sure where you are, where you belong, but you can use your same link to get back in. So hopefully that answers the question of the person who had asked it. Also, actually I just noticed somebody put in their heritage and identification in the chat. Please feel free to do that. Someone mentioned their blended Caucasian heritage is South African, French, Cherokee, Irish, Scottish, ... So yeah, people want to put their heritage in as well. So thank you, Kathleen, Deborah, Toni, for being here. And for the attendees who don't know, my dear friend Jodi is helping me monitor the Facebook Live posts because there may be comments there. So what I would love to do is what I started out yesterday doing. Well, first, I do want to acknowledge that where I am sitting today is the indigenous land, past and present, that belong to the Alwan Chochenyo Native Americans, the indigenous people. And this is really important because we're talking about centuries of land ownership that was also stripped away. And so in this, I don't have all the history of these people, and I don't want to be dismissive or offensive, but I do want to acknowledge the name of the people whose land this is, where I am currently. And I also want to acknowledge that the Black people for over 450 years have also been stripped away of benefits and of privileges and of rights, I should say, not even privileges, of rights. And so while there are very different histories, there are also some incredible similarities, which are painful. So just wanted to mention that. I also wanted to briefly give our audience, both all on Facebook, webinar, and in my podcast, definitions to start with, and then I'll start us off on a conversation. But I want to basically give the history, or not the history, I'm sorry, I'm a language person, so I really like to define words, and I'm looking for my link, I can't seem to find it now, but I want to discuss the definitions of individual racism, cultural racism, institutional racism, and structural racism. And so with that, I know where, it's in my other, okay. So here they are. And this is from a website called racialequitytools.org. And I'm actually gonna share my screen so people can just take a look, but I do have a resource list that if you're an attendee of this webinar, I will be sending you in an email when the webinar is over later this afternoon. You will have access to my resource list. And so this is just an overview. I'm just, again, going to go over the four definitions. So individual racism refers to the beliefs, attitudes, and actions of individuals that support or perpetuate racism in conscious and unconscious ways. Examples include telling a racist joke, believing in the inherent superiority of white people over other racial groups, or not hiring a person of color because something doesn't feel right, and that's in quotes. The US cultural narrative about racism typically focuses on individual racism and fails to recognize systemic racism. And what's great about this resource is then they have a lot of different links to the concept of individual racism. And yesterday in the webinar, we did watch the Snap Judgment video with Ice Leaf. So cultural racism refers to representations, messages, and stories conveying the idea that behaviors and values associated with white people or quote unquote whiteness are automatically better or normal, or more normal than those associated with other racially defined groups. Cultural racism shows up in advertising, movies, history books, definitions of patriotism, and in policies and laws. It helps justify laws and policies such as racial profiling, an action by an authority based on the assumption that every person in a particular racial group is sufficiently likely to be a criminal, and that they can be stopped, searched, or questioned. The fact of racial profiling thus creates a stereotype that people use to further justify the policy. Cultural racism is also a powerful force in maintaining systems of internalized supremacy and internalized racism. And there is more, but well, actually I do feel it's important. It does that by influencing collective beliefs about what constitutes appropriate behavior, what is seen as beautiful, and the value placed on various kinds of music, art, poetry, speech, and other forms of expression. All these cultural norms and values in the US have explicitly or implicitly racialized ideals and assumptions. For example, and maybe people didn't think about this, what nude means as a color, which facial features and body types are considered beautiful, which child rearing practices are considered appropriate. And again, more races here for cultural racism. And institutional racism refers specifically to the ways in which policies and practices of organizations or parts of systems, schools, courts, transportation authorities, police, etc., create different outcomes for different racial groups. For example, by how various kinds of assets or sources of income are considered in credit worthiness, or how the number of bedrooms or bathrooms are in a dwelling are considered by child welfare agencies. I believe I'll get to that. I think that's Monifa. I'll get to her in a moment, or Tracy. In welfare agencies, in determining whether or not a child may remain in the home when those agencies are investigating abuse or neglect allegations. The institutional policies may never mention any racial group, but their effect is to create, maintain, or fail to remedy accumulated advantages for white people and accumulated disadvantages for people from other racial groups. And then finally, structural racism. This is really important. Can everybody still see my screen? The racial, structural? Okay.
Yes.
So just a brief, so there are lots of resources here, and I just really want to pinpoint this particular website of racialequitytools.org. So we're talking about systems, the complex system by which racism is developed. This is what the overview is. Maintained and protected is often referred to as structural racism. The term was developed in part to help people working towards racial equity emphasize the idea that racism in society is a system with a clear structure and with multiple components. And so I think that's all I need to really say about that. But I think it's important for all of us to identify the fact that we have lots of levels of racism, lots of depth. Hi, Tracy. So we'll have Tracy go ahead and rename yourself, and yeah, we'll figure out how to do all that. So Kathleen, Deborah, and Toni got to introduce themselves. So Tracy, when you have a moment, you're able to unmute, you can introduce yourself and say who you are, where you are, and welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tracy Mitchell. I'm here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Been in the Midwest about 3 years. And yeah, I am a mechanical engineer in the automotive industry here in Michigan, and lesbian. And what else would you like to know?
We'll get to that. Thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yay.
I did ask the others.
Hi, Toni.
Tracy.
Oh, Toni.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hi.
Toni, did you get to answer the question about how you identify?
Oh, I identify as African American or Black. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Okay.
And I'm queer.
Okay, awesome.
I'm also African American
Okay.
and lesbian.
Okay. Yeah, and I am, and I guess I should have introduced myself. I'm Misha Safran. I am Jewish, lesbian, and what else am I? I mean, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not Black, and that's why I'm hosting this webinar, because I want other people to know that, I mean, I think they know I'm not Black, but I'm not African American. But I think what we're hearing in our society is that there's a lot of misunderstanding, that we think we know what other people are going through, and we don't. And so I want to welcome all of you here today. I want to welcome our panelists. I want to welcome our attendees. And I think that it's important for us to hear from you. So while I've given everybody the definitions of racism on various levels, individual, cultural, institutional, structural, I would like to ask all of you to just say whatever is on your mind. I guess the first question I would ask you is, how are you feeling? I want this to be a safe space for you to be here, to be present for yourself, and for us to witness you and be here and hold that space for you. And so I really would just like to hand the floor over to you to say whatever is in your hearts and on your mind that would help you, not help us necessarily. Who would like to go first?
Okay, I went first the last time. This is the last time I'm going first. All right, last time. Okay.
Do you want me to go? I can go if you don't want to. If you don't want to go first.
Go ahead, Tracy. You do it. Go ahead.
I just came from canoeing on the river with a friend of mine who's also African heritage and queer, and with her 10-year-old son. And you know, I think racism can rob you of just having those human moments where you can take an afternoon to enjoy the weather. You know, sure, we're not enslaved any longer in this country, but there are like mental shackles that kind of, and not only mental, I think real ones that prevent us from engaging in things that that are very human. And in this period of time, with Black Lives Matter, the protests and rebellion, as I call it, there is an urgency for change. And I actually, when I was out canoeing, a white friend of mine called me, and I did take the call. We just talked for a minute. And, you know, she had texted me and asked me, you know, what she could do. And I just find that such an interesting question, because Black Lives Matter didn't just happen, didn't just develop, you know, when George Floyd was murdered in front of our eyes. It's galvanized for some reason right now. But when the gentleman in St. Louis, Black Lives Matter was there too. It just wasn't as galvanized as it is now. Racism's been around for a long time. We've been, you know, dealing with the history of having been enslaved in this country for a long time. So the question, what can I do from a white person? There's two schools of thought, you know, have compassion for our allies. We can't do this alone. That's not my, that's not my direction for myself. I'm giving energy for, to African heritage folk, to anybody who will listen, and who will trust, and who is willing to step aside as a white person and be led by African heritage folk and people of color. Because guess what? White people's thinking hasn't worked so far, right? So, you know, that might feel like a generalization. It's not. It's a fact. And change is going to happen, in my opinion and in my experience, when we are willing and able, when white allies are willing and able to work on their stuff. I'm not teaching you about your own racism. I'm just not going to do it. And when people of the global majority, people of color are willing to look at their own internalized oppression, internalized racism that keeps us from building, from leading, from organizing. But I really am focused on having this moment be about real change, and for everyone else to trust our thinking, you know, and to follow our lead. Our thinking is good. And if that's the kind of coalition building that, you know, non-African heritage folk are about, then I think that's headed in the right direction. I may have more to say, but that's kind of where I'm at after a period of just being completely outraged. And I'm still, I still scream. There's still, you know, sections of my day where I just scream out loud, just so many things, thinking about the Minneapolis coroner coming out initially till they had a reevaluation saying that, you know, George Floyd died of pre-existing conditions. I mean, maybe, you know, racism is a pre-existing condition, you know, just the audacity of racism, the audacity of oppression, to think you can really shape somebody's reality who has seen somebody murdered in front of them on video and is still gonna try to change our thinking. I'm so over it. I'm so over the white gaze, the white point of view, everything. Listen, learn, follow our lead. That's where my energy is right now, and about togetherness as African heritage folk and people of color. Thanks.
Yeah, it's definitely been something. I was reading in So You Want to Talk About Race. I always say it wrong, Uluo. And that, you know, if you want to find something out, you can do your own Google search. You don't have to call your Black friends. You know what? If you that Black people are not here to inform or reform white people
or forgive.
Yeah, I mean, it is 450 plus years of pain that's unacceptable. And why are people standing up now? Why is it a priority now? For some who've been fighting a long time, okay, but a long time is not 450 years because we don't live that long. So the Black race has been under a tremendous amount of pain. And yeah, I appreciate hearing your authenticity. And I think that that's another reason why people are here, because they do want to learn. And I know that it's not your responsibility to teach us. But we are hoping that more people will show up to educate themselves. More people will show up to be better allies, ally in the verb, not ally as a noun. I think it's really important. And another thing that Jodi and I have talked about on repeated occasions is the idea of sustainable action. We don't just start having action now and then fizzle out because we think it's okay. And so, yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Who else would like to?
I agree with Tracy on most of what she has said. I understand, and I'm with her on the feelings, and probably some more people here, outrage, anger, and I had no place to put it. So when I would go on Facebook, and if I saw anything, which I normally do not do on Facebook because I leave that to fun, cute little things, all right? And I take my anger out on Twitter, but I have been blasting and writing now because I will not stand for things that come out. We have, yes, I think this is a culmination of when you look at the virus and how many people of color have died because of the virus. That hit us. And then number two, you have a young lady sleeping in her bed, hit 8 times with bullets sprayed in her house or some invasion. That hit us. You have a young man just jogging one morning. 2 guys get up, maybe had some coffee and said, well, I'll just go out and catch me a day today. And they went out and catch them and actually lynched that child. And then to sit there within a couple of weeks to see a man with his knee, no humanity, no, with his hands in his pocket like he's getting an ice cream cone from a dealer, with his knee on someone's neck, whether the man had done something, he didn't commit murder, was over a $20 supposedly bill, and he let the man choke out in plain view, obstinate to the fact that he may be charged with something. When those 4 things hit, bam, 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 everyone prior to that hit at the same time. And I believe not only Black people, African Americans, but white people said enough. This is enough. And it didn't happen only in America, it happened also globally. Enough. And I think for white people that we have become so tribal, everybody, every race has become so tribal in their age group, tribal in their where they live, boroughs, and I hear And if it doesn't happen to me in my yard, and I don't see it in my yard, it's not really happening. So now that it's out there, what do we do? Where we go from? We got to put this somewhere, and we have to be very conscious of what the next steps we're going to take. Be very pragmatic. Be to the point that we definitely want things done differently. And police reform is number one. Number two, for white people, I think they are now recognizing this is a problem. It has been happening, as we have said. It has been systematic lynching until Ahmaud Arbery was shot down in Brunswick. It was not really noticed then. Remember, those gentlemen went home for about almost a month and sat down and waiting, just like they just went fishing for the day. And they actually, knowing that the attorney down there said the word lynching, then, oh, now the feds are coming in, because you don't want that to happen. And nobody, white nor black, wants to go home and tell their child what is a lynching, what happened when that happened. And they can't hang people from trees. It's not popular anymore, so they're going to do it by guns. And these people, these factions are in our armed forces, they're in our police department, and they've been given privilege to do this. So now we have to get this anger out and start thinking systematically what can be done, because it cannot continue to happen. And people must come to terms of what has happened, and also what punishment these people are going to have. Make sure it comes about. And I also want to say that we look at white people, understand when they had slaves escaping from their bondage, they didn't make it to Ohio and New York and Chicago by themselves. The Underground Railroad wasn't Amtrak from Mississippi to Chicago. It was a system of safe places that people could go to. And most of that, half of that was ran by white people. So this is when you step up, make sure everybody in step that this does not continue. And black men, especially women, a young lady going to a job interview gets stopped because she doesn't turn a blinker on, ends up in jail, hung. So you don't want to have this happen again. And if not, we're going to have to put black people on endangered species list, because there are animals that are poached and hunted that are more protected than the black person in this country. Okay, I let that anger out, it's gone.
And if it's not gone, it's okay.
I gotta take a breath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anger is there. You are all, I mean.
Oh, it's there.
Yeah.
And I take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And I can tell by Tracy's lips have not moved. They're tight.
Yeah.
She means to stay angry.
Yeah. I agree with what Deborah and Tracy has said, and I see the situation that's been going on for years. It's like it's a wound that's been festering for decades after emancipation, and it really wasn't emancipation. And that wound right now has been opened up. And there's a lot of stuff in that wound that needs to be cleaned out, right? It's not just the police brutality. The racism affects every facet of our life. And I worked in the medical field for 25 years. And I saw where, young women would come in, they're pregnant, having their babies, and they would develop, cardiomyopathy, which is enlargement of the heart. And it was just like nothing was really done. And the statistics show that, even in the medical field, there's bias.
Oh, yeah.
There's bias in the medical field. And I read where this is, not just civil rights, it's a public health and human rights emergency. right? So we know the police brutality is there, but you talked about the institutional, we mentioned the institutional and the systemic racism. And I remember when I went for my first job doing cardiovascular ultrasound, the doctor had me, you know, I went to NYU and he had me, okay, you know, have me do this test and everything just to make sure that I knew what I was, you know, I knew what I knew. And yet there was a you know, a white person who came for the job, and I was talking to her and she's like, oh no, he didn't have me go through that. And so this is the way how I feel like when I came to this country, to be honest, you know, when growing up in England, I'm not saying there wasn't prejudice, but it wasn't like the United States. And so when I came to this country, and in New York, it was the first time that I saw any situation as far as segregation, because the neighborhoods were segregated. And if a Black person went into a certain neighborhood, they may not come out alive. And this was in the 1980s, right? So this is all that festering wound that's been going on, and we didn't have a voice. And now that wound has been opened and there's all this that's coming to light. And, you know, I say that if the white population, they have to acknowledge, because they've been in denial for so long, they have to acknowledge that this is systemic. It's not just the police, because, you know, we're having these marches, you know, Black Lives Matter. Okay, so they're dealing with the police department, but it's not just the police department. And it's like every, you know, you get an education, PhD, but you walk into a high-end store as a Black person, and you're being watched, and it's assumed that, okay, you're there not to purchase but to steal, you know, all these stereotypes. And so that with the education, with the acknowledgement, you've got to, I feel that you have to really look at your heart, because white families, what have they taught their children from generation to generation? What have they been taught? And I think as a white person, you have to examine, what have I been taught? That there's biases that I don't even know I have, right? I don't even know I have it. It's something that's been taught, and as a child growing up, it's in the unconscious. And so really, it's that time for the white population to really reflect what really has been going on in that wound and that mess. There's been a lot of lies. And so now it's time for the truth, and the truth of where your heart really is. What is your heart really saying? I mean, the church is the most segregated place, right? The most segregated. And I go to a church that is multicultural, and my pastor came out and talked about it we have Black pastors, white pastors, and they came out and they could not even, you know, they acknowledge, but to get that empathy, they had to dig deep. And I you know, I have a son, he's 23, he's upstanding, and I stress over when he has to travel. I mean, it's a lot of stress on my body. And that's what I want to portray. We have been in this situation. We're holding our breaths. We've been holding our breath for so long, and we want to be able to breathe. I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I see this as a start for the wound before we can close that wound and say, okay, it is done. And, you know, racism will always be there, but for the most part, it is done because it starts with the heart. When I looked at that policeman, you know, with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, just the look, he was sort of nonchalant. He had his hands in his pocket, and it's like he's saying, I'm gonna get you. It was just so casual for him.
I want to ask,
it was as if he had gone deer hunting.
Right.
And he's got this deer. I just thought of Get Out when they have the analogy with the deer as well. And, you know, I say it's like just that image, I could see his heart, stone cold. So how do we change the heart? It's not, you know, the policies and everything are good, but how do you change the heart of a generation?
You know, Kathleen, one of the things you mentioned was about the wound being reopened. I don't think for the Black people, please correct me if I'm wrong, if the wound has ever been closed.
Never been closed.
I think that the wound that's been reopened is for the white people to say, oh shit, this is uncomfortable again.
Right.
I don't know, correct.
Yeah, when I said the wound, I meant everyone. We know what's there as Black people, we know what's there, but the white people have denied it. They like to say, oh, slavery was 450 years ago, get over it. You know, but what about Jim Crow? They don't, this generation and even my generation may not even, well, I wouldn't say my generation, because if I was living here, I grew up in the 60s. If I was living here in the 60s, yes, I would have experienced Jim Crow. Right, but the generation that was born in the 70s, I would even say Jim Crow in the 70s in the South was still, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was still there. It was still alive and kicking, right? So this is really recent, but it's not in the history book. Everything has to be changed. The lies in the history books have to be rewritten in the schools. They have to know the truth.
Jim Crow is still present. I mean, I went on the Lavender Pen Tour with the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir and the San Francisco Gaymen's Chorus to the South, and we sang for 9 days, 5 different states. And when I actually brought up to somebody, a tall white man, I said, so tell me more about Jim Crow. He said, oh, that never existed. I had to walk away. I was like, I turned bright red. I was so angry. And there we were, like singing about love, building a bridge, and you telling me what? That was made up?
It's that denial, the denial that is really hurtful.
Yeah.
And painful.
Yeah.
So, Kathleen, you mentioned our legacy in this country of being enslaved, slavery, but to do that to someone, to enslave someone, it's much easier to do that if you view them as not human. And so that thinking, even though there's a younger generation, that thinking has just come through, right? And you know, how that police officer could have his hands in his pocket, that's still that same thinking. You're right, we don't think your lives matter. That's what all these killings are about. That's what that mentality, that enslaving another and not thinking that they're human is at the root of this wound.
Right.
And so there has to be a way to have that kind of healing. And we're demanding it. We are human.
Right.
And we're going to put you in prison for treating us in an inhuman way. that can't be the only answer. I agree.
And I think that's where the othering comes from too, because, you know, research has shown that if you can other someone, if you can view them as other than human, it's much easier to brutalize them. It's much easier to enslave them.
Exactly.
If indeed you think in your head that the person is, i.e. either not worthy or not human. You have to first go there in your head before you can subsequently brutalize and enslave them. So that is where the work is left to be done. And, you know, I am of the mind that allies can be of assistance in this fight, because I think Black bodies are very tired. And I think those who have the energy to throw behind organizations that are actively fighting against police brutality and are at the forefront of police reform. I did promise to make a list of some organizations that people could either volunteer for and donate, and I can put those in the chat, but I did want to specifically mention Campaign Zero and the Center for Policing Equity with Dr. Philip Goff's organization. Those are two at the forefront that are actively fighting against police brutality and reforming law enforcement, because indeed it's why we're sitting here today, because it keeps happening over and over and over and over and over again. And in almost every incident, it is a law enforcement officer who has overstepped their bounds for whatever reason, if it's their white supremacist ideology, or it's just they think they can get away with it, or they're just a terrible human being. So that is where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion, and would perhaps have us not sitting here if that house can get in order, because that's where all of this is stemming from, is law enforcement murdering people continually over and over and over again. And the social economic petri dish from which those ideologies have been born, really. And I think that's where the average everyday person who does have good intention, who does have a vision for a better world, a more equitable world that we all can enjoy and live in together, that's where your work can start, is just, you know, addressing that racism even inside yourself. And that's the work of the anti-racist movement. So I want to invite people to not be afraid of the anti-racist movement, because that is the request. And I think I've mentioned that before, to arrive just as you are. You don't have to arrive to an anti-racist movement already having your racism in check. The request is that you arrive with a commitment to fight racism, even when you find that inside yourself. Just having that commitment to fight racism. So I think, you know, a lot of work can be done with people, really. And I think in this pandemic period where people tend to have a little bit more time than they have in the past, it's good work to be up to really be addressing that on an internal basis as allies. And I'm speaking to allies at the moment, to really be addressing those issues to kind of create this better world that, you know, that we all would like to live in. So I'll put those two names in the chat, the Center for Policing Equity and Campaign Zero, so people can reference that, and as well as the other organizations that are working on police reform.
I do think that needs to be
Sorry, go ahead, Tracy.
I do think there needs to be an alliance when there's this coalition work going on. I think one of the bridges what has to be bridged is African heritage folk know a lot about white culture, because we have had to survive from being enslaved, Jim Crow, through everything. But racism has put us in a position of survival. We've had to figure out how to survive, and we've had to learn our environment and learn about whiteness. Mm-hmm. White people don't have that, right? Because they're in a privileged position. They don't have to learn as much about how to be around Black folks and how to think about yourself and how to survive. So there is a bridge there. So when people are forming coalitions, it's really important for there to be a strong African heritage presence, because you don't know what you don't know. And you, you know, I'm not sure that I don't have faith that white people can always see their racism. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm in a group organization, and United to End Racism. It's a space for white people to talk about racism. And unfortunately, what often happens in our organization is white people get together and they're so wounded by this and frustrated that they pat each other on the back and say, "You're good, it's okay, it's okay. You know, it's really hard. Working on racism is really hard, and I know you're struggling." And so it turns into this group of people, white people, telling themselves that they're really good, and nothing really moves. They don't move. They're not able to see their racism, and nothing changes. So I think coalition building is important and valuable and necessary. But if you don't recognize that disconnect and build that bridge, I don't think anything's going to move. And we're at a point where we're not waiting. You know, things are going to move. I mean, that's what a rebellion is. Thanks.
Right.
Tracy, it's interesting. I think what you said earlier, though, really leads to this, which is that you said white people need to trust Black people, that they're smart, that they know what they're doing, that they know where we need to go. And it's okay to follow. It's okay to give money to the organizations that have Black leaders, and let the Black leaders who know what needs to happen in these Black communities and in the systemic racist issues that we, exactly, at National ACLU, that Black Lives Matter movements, it's, you know, I was listening to, Janet, is it Tony Black? Is that his name? Anyways, you know, it's just about really identifying where, if you have money, donate the money to help the organizations that have Black leaders, to help them speak up. If you have time, donate time, but don't make it about yourself. If you have energy, donate your energy, make your voice heard, but don't put your voice above Black people's voices, because we don't know what we don't know. You're absolutely right. And even when we think we know what we think we know, we don't know. So just a reminder to the attendees, like we don't always know. What we think we know, we still need to get it checked out.
I think Kathleen, I have said this many times with friends, Kathleen has hit on something, and I've said this: things are not going to be made right until they rewrite total history of this country. It has to be from the Native Americans all the way in. It can include slavery. Only two groups here, that one group didn't ask to come, that was the African, and another group belonged here. This is their country. And they need to know the history, the today's white, Black, I don't care who you are, of immigration to this country, from white Euros coming in. They need to know and redo this history. There are some kids who understand why they took Columbus Day out. They don't know that Columbus did not discover America. When they found it out, they had to quietly let that go until they change the history. Because I don't want 40 acres and a mule. I don't want any reparation. I want them to change every bit of history. Then we will see some difference in this country. Until that, it's not going to change much. It will grow probably out of the reform for the police. But our kids, when we were all born, none of us were born racist. None of us was born, maybe we learned about racism as Black people, and white people learn about behavior that creates racism, okay? So it's the same thing as that. I teach my child what to do, not to run in a park, even though he likes to be jogging. He was jogging back there at 30 in a park, and he would tell me about a young lady, she was white with a ponytail swinging, she's jogging, and I told him, get out the park and stop jogging. And he couldn't understand why, because he went to a predominantly white school. I said, because anything that happens to that young girl, this is what I tell my son, the only thing they can remember is the Black guy that was jogging in the park. That's you. So stay out of the park. But, you know, I don't think white people tell their children what they have to expect. Now, what's going to save us It's past the millennial. I'm a baby boomer. You got some millennials here. It's a new generation that's coming in totally different thinking. They're more culturally diverse than most of the groups have been in there. But until they rewrite the whole history book of how people came from Germany, Italy, Poland, how they came in to immigrate, how they started here because of religion, getting away from to get to where they can do their own religion by themselves without being haunted down. It's not going to happen. How they took it from the Indians. The first Holocaust was the Indians being killed off and driven out of their country. This has got to be rewritten. And until it does, we're going to continue to repeat some of this over and over again. And so until now it's out, everybody understands. I guess today you couldn't find a pure white person, a pure black person in this country, period. I can look at you, look at your features. You all in Madison, you know that. Some of you just can't find it. But many people think when I was nursing that was a difference, you know. You could not go to the bathroom behind a black person. I remember taking my state boards in Montgomery, and there was one line when I went to get in line to go, they gave us a break. We were taking state boards. There was a line going out the door, all white nurses. Okay, these are nurses, educated. And they had got behind one stall because the black nurses were going in all the stalls. So they had one. I said, you're medical people. You know, if they stripped us down right now, we're all pink. What is difference? What's the difference here? So it's just ingrained in us from birth. And I do believe Kathleen is absolutely right. Until they rewrite history, it's going to continue this way until we can get some understanding of how we all came to this country.
So can I ask, there have been a couple questions. Hey, Monifa's here. Let me get you as a host mode so you can share your mic and also share your face. So there was a question, thank you very much, Deborah. There was a question on Facebook. It says, does it make